Welcome to Career Cravings with your hosts, Dev Ramcharan and Megan Reed. If you crave a better and more satisfying career, this show is for you. We're broadcasting live on Bold Radio Station every week. Now, here are your hosts, Dev and Megan.
This is Dev Ramcharan in Toronto and
Megan Reed in Toronto, and you're listening to Career Cravings on Bold Radio. On today's episode, we are going to be chatting about millennials and management and leadership. And Dev and I are going to get into trends, advice for millennials who are in management, who are working towards management. Also for people working with millennials, advice for all of those different areas. For those of you who've listened to the show before, you're probably quite familiar with Dev, and you probably have no idea who I am. So before we really get into our conversation today, I just wanted to turn it over to Dev. Maybe he can tell you a little bit about how we came together and how this season's shows are going to shape up.
Sure. So first of all, it was one of those situations where everything just seemed to line up nicely. There was a colleague of mine who had recommended that Megan reach out to me to be on the show. And she reached out to me, and I was having a conversation with her about her background, her experience, which is very rich, which involves psychology as well as career counseling, and it's really a very rich background experience for the show. So it occurred to me we could make the show richer and more interesting by actually bringing a co-host on. I liked the way she presented herself. I found her to be very articulate and to have a lot of thoughts and a lot of strong experience of life and also of members of her generation as well as other generations that she had counseled and coached and worked with over the period of her career. So I asked her if she would join me on the program. I wanted to bring in new insights, richer insights. And my thought was, by having someone who was an end of cohort baby boomer, together with someone who was a millennial, we would be able to cover effectively 3 generations and be able to share insights from the 3 generations with respect to careers in the workplace and leadership and management and building careers in different industries and so on that would make for a much more interesting, uniting, clashing alignment of ideas to make for something that would be memorable and give deep insights to our program listeners. Megan, what do you want to be able to bring to the program, and what do you envision for it moving forward this year?
Well, I think I really agree with what you mentioned, Dev, with having our different perspectives and coming from different generations. I'm really looking forward to having those differences of opinions, similarities, and just the richness of both of those ideas coming together. I think with this season and these shows that we'll do together, I really want to bring that millennial impact into the shows and have millennials listen and get energized and engaged and get insight from what we talk about to better their lives and better their careers. Careers and career cravings is really exciting for me because my background is in career counseling, and I work with so many people, so many of whom are millennials or people who at one time were in that age range. So really just bringing that advice through the different episodes that we do, the different guests that we bring on, that's what I'm really excited about. And I'm also excited personally to get this experience.
Good. And you are going to get lots of experience. And I love a good argument and a good debate. You and I both feel the same way about that. And that's going to be great for us. And when we bring our guests on, too, onto the program, it'll give us the opportunity to have a good 3-way conversation, which is always more interesting and richer than a 2-way conversation. There's also going to come a point in time where we're going to invite people to call into the program and ask us questions and give us an even richer experience of the broad global community that we have listening to these programs. We're quite looking forward to that when that time comes over the next few weeks. So, look, Megan, why don't we start talking then about the subject that we want to be able to talk about this evening? The subject, which has to do with leadership, with millennials stepping up into leadership. I want to start with you. So, as a millennial entrepreneur who stepped up into leadership, what's been your experience of how you made that step up into leadership, and what leadership and management has now meant to you as a millennial?
Well, I guess first making that step up into management, really, I think it came naturally for me. I think with the personality that I have, I am a hard worker, I am outgoing, and I really value influence and having purpose in my work. So that was something that I embodied right from the beginning of my career. I guess not right from the beginning, not necessarily in my academics or in my education, but more when I actually started working. So I wanted to take on different tasks. I wanted to be aware of what was going on in my organization. And so I asked for those types of opportunities, and I got involved in areas that I didn't need to get involved in, but that I wanted to be involved in. So I think my foray into management and leadership, it was really natural and really simple. And I don't know if that's the case for everyone, but that's kind of how it went for me. And then I kind of asked for some opportunities along the way. And with the leader that I had and the boss that I had, she was so supportive and such a great mentor that it worked really naturally. I think it benefited me and it benefited the organization. So it just seemed to make sense.
So, even as I hear what you're saying, there's a couple of attributes that seem to come through, or decisions and behaviors that really are very, very helpful in helping somebody to jump onto the springboard that leads to a leadership opportunity. So,
what would you say? Oh no, that's okay. I was going to say, what were those? What would you pick out from your viewpoint or from your perspective? What do you see in my story that you think would apply to other people?
I think one of the things that you did was you jumped in to help your boss with tasks that offloaded from her bucket of work that she had to do day to day. So, in you sharing with me previously, and some of what you talked about now, you said that you were hardworking, that you were well organized, and that you stepped up to take on additional work, and it was a natural progression for you. Part of that was taking on work and activities that were actually tasks performed by management. Would you say that was the case?
Yes.
And what kinds of tasks were those that you took on for your boss that really started to put you more into a management frame of thinking?
I think a couple of things. I think thinking about the bigger organization and things that I could do or things that we could do as an organization that would benefit us as a company. So just coming up with ideas. We are a collaborative team to begin with. So in team meetings, different ideas. And I guess the other thing too, I should say, is that my team and my management was open to receiving those types of ideas. So different things we could do to promote our company, different things we could do to bring in clients, things like that. I would also say knowing where my skill set was and where it maybe differed from my managers or leaders. So one thing that I definitely brought to the table in the counseling and psychological world was having a really analytical mind. Most psychologists, and this is very stereotypical, are much more empathetic, feeling oriented, people intuitive, a bit more so than I am. I'd say I've built up those skills, but naturally I'm very critical and questioning. And so really delving into the numbers side of the business, I think that was something. And that came after time when trust had been built up in me and I was allowed and given that ability to look at the numbers. So those are a couple examples of things that I did.
Okay, so a couple of things come out again further. So one, the willingness to step up and take on administrative tasking. Two, the way that you expressed yourself and that you shared your thinking so that they could get insights into your mind, and the quality of your thinking as an individual was also an important thing to do in moving towards becoming a manager. There's a third thing that comes out in what you've just said that is also something that I would be looking for people that I would promote into leadership roles in my own organization and in my experience as a leader. And that would be your thinking was not just about you and your own personal benefit. Everything that you said just now indicates that you thought for the company. You thought about its customers. You thought about growing its business opportunities. And that is a trait of leadership, to think beyond the self for the good of the whole, of the group, of the team, of the organization as a whole. And what you were showing at your early stage of career is quite advanced thinking around business growth opportunity. Would you say that's true?
I would say that's true. And I would say the three different ways that I kind of consider my career or the company that I work for, I do want to think about my personal interest and, what I want out of my life, where my goals are, where I'd like to see my career grow. So that's in one piece of my mind. I think another element is I really do like helping other people. So as new team members or counselors or employees or contractors were brought on, I really liked helping them grow and learn and develop their skills. And so being really helpful and supportive, providing critical feedback, that was something really important. And then third, like you mentioned, really that overall organization and keeping in mind what needed to be done to make the organization more successful than it was. And I would say, again, that a lot of what we'll talk about with the different generations, I think, can be seen a bit stereotypically. This isn't a hard and fast rule for every millennial, but I do think millennials as a whole really have a collaborative mindset and do really want to think strategically about themselves and their organization as a whole. What do you think? Would you agree with that, or would you disagree with that? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think when millennials are given the opportunity to think at that level, and when they are able to step away from not just something that millennials struggle with, but any younger cohort entering the workplace struggles with, then they naturally move into a collaborative space and tend to think for the group as a whole, as opposed to themselves only. Now, people sometimes act today as if millennials move into the workplace, they're spoiled, they're entitled, they want to be able to get promoted just because they've showed up as opposed to results and things they've contributed to the organization. But can I just say, every generation coming new to the workplace in North America and in the Western world, and more than likely all around the world, has been perceived in the same way as a group of hostile, entitled, spoilt intruders into the domain of generations that were already populating the workplace. When the boomers were moving into the workplace, exactly the same sort of criticism was made of them. When the Gen X generation moved in, they were seen the same way. And of course, there are certain tags that were associated with each of these groups of people coming in. So boomers were seen as extremely pushy, aggressive, competitive, and edgy. And often that's how they could be. The Gen X cohort, as they were coming into the workplace, were seen as slackers who were more interested in their social life than they were in the workplace. Now, what that was in fact a gross misinterpretation by the baby boomers and the generation before them. What in fact Gen X was saying is, I'm not selling my life in total to a company or an organization. Life for me is not just my work. It also includes my family life, my personal life, my social and individual growth as a person. And that's something which today in 2016, we know is a good message and a right message. Whereas the boomers, because of the size of the cohort that they belong to, were so massive in quantity that competition and sometimes aggressiveness and sometimes politics, dirty politics, became a few of the things that people fell prey to in their effort to climb up the ladder into leadership. So Some of the things that you've just said, I agree absolutely. A couple of things I just want to reiterate. So if I were to use you as an example, and I'm going to use you as an example based on the story because you're bringing out some typical aspects and characteristics of what it takes for an individual to move up into leadership. One, you were willing to work hard and put in the elbow grease that you needed to in order to learn the job, to get the job done, and get it done well. Second, you were an individual who, though you were thinking about your individual and personal growth, also had the ability and a deep willingness to think in terms of the group and of the company as a whole. What can we as an organization do and do better and do really well? Three, you were willing to see that your boss was struggling in certain areas and to step forward and gently, but at the same time, very frankly, offer to take on board those tasks that you felt you would like to be able to do and offload from your boss. And another aspect of it is a real strength of character that says, I can do this. I may not know how to do things exactly and completely well right now, but I'm going to take them on and try and learn and do them better and better as time goes by. Would you say all of those things are true?
I would agree with all of those things. And I would say, again, a lot of those things to me are very generational. So the first thing, I guess, that collaborative mindset, really, if you think about my generation growing up, we were on so many sports teams and extracurriculars, and everything was about teams and groups. So I think even in school, we were always put in groups. And I don't know if that's the same for every other generation, but I think growing up that way, really impacted who we've become as millennials. I think another thing, coming or going back a little further, where the mindset was really respect your elders, do what you're told, you're to be seen and not heard. Those sorts of attitudes, I don't think that was as present when my generation was being raised. We were taught to, speak up and be individuals, things like that. So I think that really comes along with confidence and valuing growth and valuing independence and valuing making a contribution. So those are all different elements I would throw in there too. Go ahead, Dev.
No, go ahead. Keep going. One
other thing that just to go back to that you touched on, I think is a big one out there in a lot of people's minds, is that stereotype about millennials being lazy. And I think that is a horrible stereotype, because my thoughts on that one are millennials aren't lazy. They really embody working smart as opposed to working hard. So that would be one thing that I would want to put a stop to right there, that myth that millennials are lazy. I think now, from some of the research that I've seen, at least 63% of millennials have bachelor's degrees. And it's kind of become the standard now, more and more, that you need that post-secondary education, and millennials have to work hard to get there. I think the other thing too is that we are entitled. And I think that is not quite correct either. I think we work hard and we want to be successful, but I think we are willing to put in that hard work, but also, like I said, working smart as opposed to working hard. So those would be a couple of my thoughts just in the position of being a millennial. How would that differ, I guess, from your generation, Dev?
Okay, so a couple of things. So I want to argue a couple of points, and that is the working smart as opposed to working hard. If working smart means that I get my full day's effort done in 2 hours, and I just basically relax and take it easy for the rest of the day and mosey around and may or may not take on some additional tasks or not, I don't think that's working smart. I think if working smart entails finding more effective ways to do things so that I can then do additional work which still benefits the company, but which may be more along the lines of additional work I'd like to do. Also, work that begins to differentiate me as someone who can become a leader or a manager in the company, then that is great. If that's how we interpret working smart, then I think that is working smart. But if working smart means I take a 7.5-hour workday that I owe to my employer, and I do a 4-hour workday because of the efficiencies that I've found and been able to create, so that I don't really have to work the other 3.5 hours, then I don't think that's working smart. So I know that's not what you're saying, but I think that there are some people out there who tend to think that that's what working smart entails. Would you agree that that's a possibility that some people might interpret it that way?
I would agree that it could be interpreted that way, and that would not be the way that I look at it. I really like what you said, where if I can get the work that's required of me done more quickly or more efficiently and still at a high quality, what else can I do in those extra hours that can add extra value and that is something I might be a little bit more personally motivated or personally passionate about doing? That to me is working smart. I think something else, and this is kind of blending into a bit of another issue, is really around that workday. And I think a big transition, whether it be because of the generation of millennials or because of technology, I think my generation is really more about working over that entire 24 hours than strictly 9 to 5. So from the research I've seen, millennials actually work quite long hours, but I think where they're pushing back is I don't want to be stuck in this box 9 to 5. I think, you're expecting me to check my email or be open to phone calls after work hours. So during my work hours, I might want to have some flexibility and some freedom there, an extended lunch hour or the ability to be on my social media, knowing that I still need to get all my work done. I just want to be in control of when exactly that work gets accomplished.
And these are good points, because that is what the research is saying. Millennials are like. The challenge is going to be to see how organizations, how business, how public sector, how government are going to flex in order to reframe their business operations models to be able to accommodate that degree of flexibility. And they may well do so. Some may do it better than others. Some may really struggle to do it. The more traditionally hierarchical a structure is, the more difficult it is going to be for them to be able to take on board that degree of flexibility and to realign their thinking. They may have no choice to as time goes by, definitely, but they will struggle the hardest. And the experience they'll have is they'll be the least attractive organizations to work for millennials. And just through force of reality impacting these organizations, as time goes by, they'll bring in the consultants who will help them to make the changes that they need to make so that they can make for a more humane workplace, and one that has built into it more of the flexibility that you've just talked about. You asked me the question, so what was it like as far as our generation was concerned, the baby boom generation? And I'm I guess what you would call a cohort cusp, because I was at the end of the baby boom generation. I'm a 1962 baby, and the cohort ends in 1964, and I'm on the cusp of the Gen X generation. So it makes for an interesting combined sort of blend of insights from both generations. Baby boomers saw management and leadership as a trophy to achieve for themselves. They were more interested in competing against their colleagues to win the trophy that the others lost, so that they could then take on that role of manager, which was something that gave them a degree of influence, but also prestige, and access to power that their other colleagues and peers didn't have. That's a really different mindset to the mindset of a millennial. The other thing is this: you mentioned that it was once the case that that employees were supposed to be well-behaved sheep who did what they were told, didn't answer back, didn't argue, didn't propose better ways to do things. Their job was just to basically be seen, get their work done, but not heard, and to be agreeable. And those were the days when we actually referred to our bosses as Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith. We never called any boss, any manager by their first name. Everybody was Mr. Or Mrs. And that was really a rotten kind of work culture to be in the middle of, because what it did was it encouraged all the wrong kinds of behaviors for people to move into leadership and to retain their hold through blood, sweat, and tears on leadership, cutting out and edging out anybody who could potentially become a leader beside them. Now, what I'm saying is an extreme picture, but what I'm doing is I'm portraying the extremes of the generation. So that was how we viewed leadership. It was a trophy to be won, and you won it in competition with others, and they lost it, and you now had a degree of power and prestige that everyone else didn't have. That was the way it was for the boomers back in the day. Now, what's it like then when you hear that as somebody who's a millennial?
I would say it sounds much too formal and hierarchical. And I don't think it would be particularly motivating for me to work in an environment like that. So that is, with what you described, again, understanding that that's the extreme stance on the baby boomer generation in the workplace. Yeah, that is not appealing for me whatsoever, and I don't think that would be appealing for a lot of millennials. I think the element of respect, I think that's an interesting one, because in that generation, the way that you're describing it to me sounds like I should respect you, or my respect is given based on hierarchy or title, as opposed to being earned. And I think that would be something that my generation would say. I think another stereotype that comes up in work and out of work is that millennials are not respectful. And again, that's a very broad, overarching statement. But I think really a difference that I would notice, especially in the clientele that I work with, and that's, the research in the clientele is what I can, my own personal experience is what I can speak to, is that millennials really give respect where they feel respect is due, where respect is earned, as opposed to respecting someone just because they're in a position of authority. That isn't good enough now, where I feel like the way you described the boomers, if someone is your boss or your manager, you respect them because they're your boss or your manager.
Yeah, that was exactly the case. It was exactly the case. You respected the title as opposed to the individual because of his or her attributes, characteristics, the way that they engage with their team, and so on and so forth. It was a very militaristic approach, but you got to remember to Meg, that we were a generation that came after the war. We were the post-war baby boom, and you remember the impact that the military had on the war, on the world during the war. It had won the war, and people had been exposed to a hierarchical structure that had been very effective in winning over a dire sort of opposition with the Nazi powers and the Axis nations that worked together with the Germany at that particular point in time. So that militarism filtered down. And remember too, we were children of something that you would know historically as the Cold War, which means it was a battle of us against them. Now, granted, we're seeing echoes of that today in the world we're living in with some of the extremists of all varieties, political, religious, whatever they may be, who are out there causing stresses and strains in our world. But then it was massive culture and block of countries versus massive culture and block of countries. There was the Soviet Union with all of its lockdown on thought, on freedom, on the ability for individuals to be individuals and to have thoughts of their own. And then that was sort of in great opposition to what the West liked to pride itself on, though in actual fact, the freedom that it thought it had, it didn't necessarily have to the degree it imagined it had. That was more what was in the popular media. But the reality was there was a significant amount of control and oversight by governments through the period of the Cold War in Western countries, as much as there is today. So that kind of military background, the background of the war, the hierarchical structures that were traditional in Western society, these affected the workplace. The workplace, in effect, was a military structure. There was a CEO, so that would be your admiral or your person who was at the top of the chain, your four-star general, whatever the case may be, and the staff that reported to that one, the staff that reported to them, the staff that reported to them, and then all the employees that were down below. So that structure, that way of doing business was founded on the structure of organizations like the military? Was it a place to grow and to develop, to become enriched as an individual, so that the workplace was yet another place for individual growth and development? And the truth is, no, they weren't. But it was what we knew. It was what was at the time. And people found ways to prosper and to find some way of finding fulfilling careers in those structures in spite of the constraints of the way things were built. I think today we're moving in a better and a different direction. My little team, I've got the smallest team I've had in years now in the job I'm doing, but I've got a team of 5 people reporting to me, 3 of whom are millennials, and I think the world of all of them. They're a great team. Part of that is because we're extremely collaborative, very much a partnership-oriented team. The buck stops with me, and they know that I am the leader. I don't have to keep telling them I'm the leader. I don't need to ever tell them I'm the leader. I just lead. But at the same time, there's a significant amount of collaboration, full empowerment of them to do their jobs and to explore, to enrich and develop further what they're doing. And I think that seems to me to be an environment that works best for millennials, but not just for millennials, for everybody. Now, what do you think about that so far?
I would agree with that. And I think from what I know about you, it makes a lot of sense that you would make a good leader to millennials, because as you were speaking, and I think giving some history on baby boomers and the generation and the cultural influences going on, I think you made a really good point about bringing culture into the mix and how it impacts the work environment. So I think, as you mentioned, with the baby boomers being influenced by the military, I think as things change and we move down to Gen X, getting a little bit more freedom in that generation, kind of the invention of business casual came to be. Things started to get a little more casual. And I think moving into the millennial side of things, really the transition that's being made now is really to focus on people first. So whereas the boomers were, I think, with that militarized kind of mindset, it was really task focused. I think now we've transitioned more and more into people first and people focused. So when you speak about your leadership and leading millennials, I think that, and enriching them as individuals and allowing them to contribute, I think that makes perfect sense for a leader now, either one who is a millennial or someone leading millennials, to really be interested and engaged with the employees that you have. So I think that's great, Dev, and it makes total sense knowing what I know about you that you would lead in that sort of way.
The funniest thing in the world is I walk by one day and I see my 3 managers, the managers that report to me, and there's some other staff too. They're having their own private meeting together and resolving and solving and thinking through a bunch of business problems. Now, when I was a young manager, you would get yourself basically shot, drawn and quartered. That would be the end. That would be the end. If you had somehow spontaneously pulled together a team of managers to have their own meeting without the director or the AVP or the VP there in the room, you would absolutely be that would be a career-threatening move. To me, I looked at that and I thought, that's perfect. That's wonderful. Because now they've sorted out a bunch of things together. They're going to come to me with ideas. We just need to refine the ideas and we're good to go. And that's exactly what they do. So they have a meeting amongst themselves, and they have a meeting with me, and we continue to move and to grow the department in ways that I think are probably just short of startling. The amount of work we've taken on, the challenges we have, also the level of exhaustion that we feel, but we're doing some remarkable things. And I say we, and I very much say we, because the team has been very, very much a part of this. I'm very fortunate to have this team working with me. Another aspect of what Gen X brought to the workplace was this. You have to look at the economic cycles that each of these generations has been through. So the boomers went through many, many years of growth and growth and growth and growth and growth with 1 or 2 short recessions. When the Gen X generation came of age, they came of age in the following kind of economic situation. One, manufacturing jobs were no longer king. What was now king was a newly emerging information sector. And manufacturing jobs, where their parents had worked in factories for companies like GM, for instance, General Motors, for 25 years, they were losing their jobs to countries outside of North America. They were watching their moms and dads who had lived their lives in the company for all their lives since they were teenagers being thrown out the door, so that they were absolutely in despair. And what Gen X learned is a profound distrust for organizations. They knew they could never, ever trust an organization, so they didn't. The second thing is, they knew their moms and dads had put in so much time into their careers. Baby boomers, for baby boomers, your job title and where you worked defined who you were. That's what defined you. Not the cultural things you were involved in, not the intellectual pursuits of your mind, not the community and the volunteer work that you did. What actually defined you was your job, the company you worked for, and your job title. That's what defined you. And Gen X kids looked at that and they thought, that is all rubbish. My mom and dad have given all of their overtime hours. They've abandoned me in many ways. Both my mom and my dad have been making oodles of money, and at that particular point in time, the divorce rate was starting to crest, where over half of marriages were falling apart. So a lot of Gen X kids were latchkey kids, used to looking after themselves, but developing a kind of distrust for leadership, a kind of distrust for formal organizations. And when they started talking about work-life balance, what they were really saying is this: I need to look after the aspects of life that don't get looked after, which I cannot trust an organization to look after. Therefore, I'm going to insist on doing this, and I'm going to build into my life the degree of flexibility where I do not overcommit my time to a company, and where at the same time I'm able to spend the time with the loved ones that I have, and where my whole life is not going to boil down to my title. It's not going to boil down to my position in a company and the company that I work for. Do you have any thoughts around that, Megan, as you hear this rant about generations?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think the next transition, and really where things are headed with millennials, is a transition from work-life balance to a work-life blend. I think more and more that, I guess, the position, the company, the title, those sorts of things. Now people and millennials, in my opinion, are a lot more concerned about purpose, what they're getting from their work, what they do in their work, as opposed to just their title. Of course, there are people out there who do like to be affiliated with companies of high status or positions that have more status tied to them. But I think ultimately, to feel good in what you do, whether it's that I contribute in a meaningful way in my role, that, if I'm not here for the day, my job doesn't get done because other people don't know how to do it. So I have that unique skill set, or, what I do in my job or what my company does contributes to the greater good. I think having that purpose is really key. And again, ties to that work-life blend as opposed to a balance. It's, I want my work to be meaningful and be a part of my life. And again, I think tying also into that idea of I can do my job throughout my entire day as opposed to 9 to 5. I can work remotely. I can work independently as a contractor or a freelancer as opposed to being tied into a role. So I think it's really interesting and really rich to get into the differences in the generations and really how it's just transitioned over time with those different cultural and political and economic factors.
That's true. We really are children of the culture of the time that we're living in the middle of, and the culture that I will have grown up in as a young professional is going to be completely different to the culture that you will have grown up in as a young professional. We've talked a lot about the generational impacts, and maybe one day it might be nice for us to have a show talking about the generations and what are the attributes, because in a multi-generational workforce where there are 4 generations working together, you have millennials, you have Gen X, you have baby boomers, and you do have some people, especially in consulting, who are part of the generation that's referred to as the veterans, that come before the boomers. And these are people who might be in their 70s. They might even be in their 80s. You, for instance, know entrepreneurs and businessmen who are as active today in their 80s as they were in their 20s, don't you?
I do, and that actually scares me because I know people are working to older and older ages, but I really like the idea of retiring in my 50s. I don't think I need to be fully engaged in my career in my 80s, but again, because meaning in my career and my life, I want them to overlap. I do foresee myself being involved in certain ways, but definitely not in a full-time capacity in my 80s.
So one of the things that we should maybe touch on a little bit is this. So we've talked a little bit about, especially in connection with your career, what are some of the things that you want to be able to do if you want to make that step into leadership or into management as a millennial. So if you'd permit me, let me just sort of give a few points for a couple of minutes, and I'll turn it over to you
Sounds
for
good.
different points. So the thoughts that I have are, one, as someone who wants to step up into leadership or management, the first question you want to ask yourself is why? Why? What's your motivation? Is it power? Because if it's power, that's not what you want to be able to do. Don't move into management because it's a power thing. Second, is it for the title? Well, it might be partially for the title, but don't let that be the driving force either. Third, is it because you spot in yourself a series of skills, abilities, potentials, which you feel will only be completely actualized if you are in a position of leadership in a company, so that you can maximize your contribution and at the same time maximize your personal development? That's a good reason for moving into management. Another one is, if you love to help other people to progress, to grow, and to develop, and it delights you to see them grow and move upward and onward, then you are someone who's a natural leader. Another thing, if you're someone who takes delight in watching your company, its structures, its products, its services grow and become more and more impactful in the world in which you live, you're also an individual who might be suited to leadership. But remember, in every one of these things, it's not just about you. If it is only about you, you're not a leader. What you are is somebody bucking for power or bucking for title. But if it's about you and others, especially you and others for their betterment as well as your own, then you've got something that is foundational. It's kind of like the DNA that's wound tightly in the heart of natural leaders, natural managers, the people who step up and step forward to be able to have an accountability for what happens with yourself, with an organization, and with other people who work with you. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Another thing is this. If you've been sitting in a role for some length of time and you start getting a little blue and a little bit resentful and a little bit hot under the collar because you haven't been rewarded with a management role, then you're not thinking clearly either. There are some people who over the years I have spoken to and who want to become a manager or a supervisor, or who may even want to move up into a directorship. And when you ask them, well, why do you think you should be able to make that step? The answer is, I've been in this company for 12 years. It's about time. They need to make me a manager. And the attitude is wrong, the motivation is wrong, and the complete absence of understanding of what it really is to be a leader becomes completely self-evident or very evident in that circumstance. So we do not become managers because we want to be, or we think we ought to be, or because we think we deserve to be. We become managers and leaders because we're demonstrating the traits of leadership and management before we become managers. That's what Megan Reid did. She started to be a leader. She started to be a manager before there was even a title like that associated with her. So that when her boss gave her what she eventually gave her, it was not just natural, it was just plain common sense. It's what needed to be done. This is the person who's making a contribution that's advancing the organization and others in it. Why not give her the ability to do that with more empowerment and more freedom and more opportunity to take personal initiative so that she can do the things that she does and that she did. So that's my thinking. What do you think so far about all of that?
I think a key thing that you've circled around a little bit is really that difference between managers and leaders. And whether you're a millennial or not, I think that difference between leadership and management is becoming more and more clear in the work world today. I think historically people would have seen leaders and managers to be the same thing, whereas now I think the way they're conceptualized, managers are people who get tasks accomplished, get things done on time, on schedule, the way they're supposed to be done. And ideally, when you're a manager, you are a leader as well. But oftentimes managers are not leaders. And I think what you've really hit on is that a leader is someone that wants to grow people and engage people and empower people. And of course, the tasks need to be completed, but that way of leading I think takes a much different form than management. So I think that's one key thing that you hit on without explicitly kind of saying it. What else would I say? Oh, that's a big one that I caught on to as you were speaking. What else did you want to say today or talk about today, Dev?
A couple other things, and that is this: when you're moving into leadership. So let's say it frankly. Then I think you put that beautifully. That was very diplomatically clarified and brought out into relief. Leaders and managers are not necessarily things that are coincident with each other. A manager gets things done, but a leader develops individuals in the organization and also develops overall processes and frameworks to improve and enhance the way that things get done. It's not just a matter of getting things done. It's completely rethinking the overall framework for getting things done and creating a culture that enables and empowers people to explore their potential and to explore better and more improved ways of delivering greater value for the organizations that they actually serve in. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, something that I would say that is not said in a lot of the texts, and that is you need to care about your employees and you need to love your employees. Now, that's a big word, and believe me, for an analytical like you, that may cause your eyebrows to be sticking out from your head a little bit right now, isn't it, Millennial? I know it
yes,
probably
love,
is.
care, and concern. Those are great words. When you say love, my eyebrow is
Let me give you what
right
I mean.
now. Tell me what you mean.
If love is a strength of emotional engagement with an individual, so that you care deeply enough about them to care about their progress as much as you care about your own. And also you care about being honest and frank enough with them about the things that they need to do differently, the things that they need to work on, but always with that deep empathy and compassion that come with that emotion, that strong emotion that I described, then what you will find is you will create an engine for excellence in the team that you work with that will take you to a level you would not have imagined. Let me give you a little bit more context for that. We can still be in a world of this is what I need you to do, and I'd like you to get it done by such and such a time frame. Is that fair, or do you need more time? Good. Can we nail down this date? Great. Nail down the date. And then you follow up, and if you see signs of stress, what's going on so I can help you remove the source of stress, and then you keep moving forward. That can still be a highly evolved and sophisticated form of task management. It still may not be ministering to the needs of the individual for personal and individual growth and growth opportunities. And so when you have that deeper concern and care for the individual, and by the way, you may still have to terminate somebody that you care that way about because you realize they are either a very bad match for the job that they have, or they are at a stage in their lives where they do not realize what they have, and they have to be moved on so someone who can realize the value of this role can step into their place and take it on. And if you care deeply for that individual, you can still terminate them with compassion and respect, and it is motivated by a loving concern for them. So that way of engaging with your staff, when as a leader, as a manager, director, vice president, CEO, entrepreneur, whatever you may find yourself being, there are days when you are going to be drowning because you can't get done what you need to get done, or you may be going through your own emotional or personal or family or health crisis, or it may be that there's just one more additional tough work circumstances that adds to your back and is like the last straw breaking the camel. When you care deeply for your staff, they naturally push in, take on, and carry you forward in those moments of crisis. I've seen it, and I've experienced it as an individual. And so if you have that deep concern for them, if you engage with them as people you care about deeply, but you never tell them that. You don't say, team, I love you as individuals. You don't, that's that you don't do. But inside, you look at them as someone who loves and cares about them deeply and wants the best for them, as well as for yourself and for the organization, right? And it takes you to a deeper level of engagement. Now, you might call it something other than love. You might just call it engagement, deeper engagement, whatever it is. Engage as deeply as you can so that you see the staff you work with absolute, realistic, crystal clear clarity. No self-delusions, no clouds, no rose-colored glasses. You see them as they are. So you see their potential, but you also see those areas which they have got to work on to improve so that they can become more effective as individuals. It's a very, very remarkable and a powerful way of engaging with your staff. So I hope that didn't shock you too much, but it's something I've learned over the years. I've learned to love the staff that I work with, and it makes all the difference in how I engage with them. And when I'm in times of my own personal struggles in the workplace, it helps them to spot, see, and jump in to do something to support.
Well, I think you hit on a couple key aspects. First of all, the way you're speaking to me sounds like the way a millennial would talk, except maybe a little bit more articulate and experienced. But no, I think you hit on a key point that I brought up earlier, which is that I don't necessarily, as a millennial, respect someone because they're an authority figure. I respect them because they've earned my respect. And I think to be treated in a compassionate and understanding and empowering, supportive sort of way, that's something that really gets me going and gets me empowered and gets me motivated. So I think as a leader, that's an excellent way to lead and manage people. I think also understanding your team or the people that work with you or for you from those personal connections really brings in that element of where millennials are today, where personal and work boundaries are more and more crossed. So the more in the past, maybe we wouldn't even talk about what we do in our free time, or we'd make it very superficial or surface level. But now to get engaged with your staff or your employees a little bit more deeply, again, not that you need to know all the ins and outs of their personal life, but to know a few more personal things about them, I think, again, really can be a motivating thing for a millennial. So those are all great, and those are things that I would recommend to people who manage or work with millennials, is build those connections, because that is empowering and it is something that ultimately is going to better the organization. So that's great to me, Dev, and I good job on your part. I'd work for you.
Well, look, we've come to that time in the show where we're going to draw this first segment to an end, and we'll move to the second segment. And what will happen is I'll say a few words and make a few final observations about what we've talked about in the show, and then Megan will do the same, and then we'll come to an end. So we'll move now to our second segment. So we've talked this evening about leadership and about management and making that step from where you are now into a management role. One of the key things that really stand out in my mind, especially reflecting on the career of a millennial like Megan, is you need to be able to have the humility to take on tasks that may not be part of your job description, to freely and willingly offer your hands to the people that you support who are your leaders, to take on from them things that you can look after reliably so that they have that terrific sense of personal relief that someone is watching their back, looking after them, and taking care of their needs, especially some of those administrative tasks that might take more time than you have to give and might rob you away from some of the more strategic things that you need to be involved as a senior leader. So that's something that's really important. The second thing that stands out for me as I reflect on Megan's story is that you need to also be thinking past yourself. Definitely, you're part of the equation, and you, of course, want to grow personally as an individual. You want to increase your competence, your knowledge, your experience, but you also want to be able to see your company, your organization, and the teams around you progress, to become more effective, to diversify the products and services or integrate the products and services so that the company is more profitable, more able to grow and develop. And Megan's story actually is one that very much illustrates this, because she's opened up a Toronto office for the organization that she joined a few years ago, and really is in an entrepreneurial sort of mindset and space as someone working for this organization. So think past yourself. Also, the difference between management and leadership. Management is about getting things done. Leadership is about getting the right things done in the best ways possible in order to build the people who are engaged in serving the company and its clients and its customers. So those are a few things that I would want to leave with you as I now move things over to my partner, my co-host, Megan, who will tell you her thoughts and then draw us to a conclusion.
Thanks, Dev. Well, I think what's really funny is, despite our generational differences, I think some of my key takeaways from what we spoke about today are really in line with what you said. So you took some of the words right out of my mouth. I think a couple other things that stood out for me and that I think are really important to highlight are, again, that work-life blend. And I think I'm really interested and excited to see how the environment of the work world is going to transition and really make this work for millennials and future generations who really do want to blend that work and that career and the personal life together throughout that entire 24 hours. I think technology is going to play a big role in that as well. So that would be one big takeaway. I think you hit on another one for me, which was that difference between management and leadership. I think another thing that stood out to me from something you said earlier is really that transition from, in the past, if you were good at what you did, you got to move into management. So you put in your time, you got good at your skills, and then you moved into managing people who did those things. Whereas now, more and more, management and leadership are its own subset of skills, and they can really transition across positions, across industries. So those skills of being engaged in people, being strategic, seeing the big picture, being interested in the growth and development of others. I think those are skills now that leaders need more than ever and managers need more than ever to be in those management roles. And just being good at what you do isn't going to be good enough or isn't going to cut it anymore to move you and advance you in your career. So I think one, like you mentioned, really being clear about, is management or leadership something you want to get into, or do you really want to get good at a technical skill and be good at the position you're in? You don't have to move up the career ladder. You can move across the career lattice. So those are a couple things just stemming from what we discussed today. I think with the time we're at now, we'll end it there today. So I just want to thank everyone for listening to our show today. Dev and I will be back next week, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, next Sunday, and we will be speaking with Lara Jitsi, who we'll be interviewing, and she's someone who is a doctor and who trained out of the country. So really excited to get into the medical field with her. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week.
The career discussion doesn't stop here. For more information about how to transform your career, visit CanadaCareerCounseling.com. And remember to tune in next Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Bold Radio Station for the next episode of Career Cravings.